Hello everyone, and welcome to a video that I don't really have a title for yet, but I'm sure there'll be a title on it by the time it goes up, probably. I'm Laura, I'm here as ever to talk about video games and the such, and today I'm here with a special guest to talk about an aspect of video games. Who are you, special guest, that I have very awkwardly introduced without a real title for what we're doing?
That's okay, Laura. Hi, people listening and watching this video with no name yet as we talk. My name is Tanya DePass. You probably have heard of me because I yell a lot about race in video games on the internet. If you've seen I Need Diverse Games, that was me, who started it literally about 3 years ago being mad about video games. And, you know, I get a chance to write about this and talk about this a lot. And I saw a great piece that Laura did on IGN and was like, I have thoughts. And they were like, let's chat. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, this is one of these things where we kind of went into this without really discussing what we were going to do. It's just like, I put up an article that was about headcanon and character creators, and Tanya was like, I have thoughts about character creator headcanons, and we both sleepily rolled onto Skype and were like, I guess we're going to have a conversation. So we're going to talk about race and its role in character creators, because there's a bunch of stuff that probably needs talking about there.
Yeah, that's accurate, because for those that are listening that may not know my work or know who I am and why Laura's chatting with me at this early hour for me, I talk a lot about diversity in games, and character creators, while they're great, don't usually give me, as a black person and a fat person, options to accurately create myself in the games that I love. And a lot of times I have to fall back on a headcanon or just go, okay, so it's Thetis, no one knows how to maintain natural hair, this is why there's no braids or dreadlocks or anything else that would have probably been more accurate versus really short, like, afros and the one kind of half-ass braided thing we get in Mass Effect. So those are things from, like, I've been playing games for years and I still can't accurately recreate myself in a game world that's supposed to be going, here, you go be the hero.
Yeah, so often character creators are brought up as this example of, like, oh, you know, racial diversity in games isn't that bad, because most character creators now let you change your skin tone, and therefore you can be a character of colour, and therefore the problem is solved, which, like, overlooks so much of, like, wanting to represent yourself within a video game. This idea that, like, yeah, if you can represent your skin colour, that is absolutely everything about the physical appearance of someone of a different race that you might want to represent. You change the skin colour, everything's good.
Yeah, and that's not really it, because, you know, like actual people, you know, being a person of color, being a black American-born person, that is not all there is to me. There's a word called intersectionality. So, for those that aren't used to this word or have never heard it, it is where the intersections of your identity meet. So, you know, for me, I'm cisgender, I'm black, I'm female, American-born, I'm fat. There's a lot about me that would go into this character that I just simply can't do, and being able to go, but you can be brown, that's cool, right? No, it's not. That's not all there is to me. In fact, that is the first physical identifier you might see about me, but that is not the whole person. And, you know, for a player who wants a truly immersive experience, who wants to put themselves in their rider, their shepherd, their hawk, their warden, just because I can be brown means nothing, because the world does not react to that.
Yeah, like, there's so much that is overlooked in it. Like, it's like, yeah, you can be brown, but you can't, like, you've got to be brown with, like, long straight hair that fits into this, like, very, very, like, this is the hair type you have. Deal with that. And, like, yeah, I think there's definitely something to talk about in what you were bringing up, this idea of the world not reacting to changes you make aesthetically, because this happens with character creators, I think, for, like, any kind of real change you make to them. Character creators are not a substitute for crafted characters, because they're aesthetic, not narrative. Like, the changes you make visually usually have zero impact on the way anyone in the world views you. You are still the same, like, mannequin with things pasted on top of it as far as the game's concerned.
Exactly. Before we started recording, we were talking about Skyrim. Like, that's probably the closest I've had where a game will go, oh, you're a red guard, oh, you're a lizard person, or a Khajiit. But it's still more about class versus race. And, I can still look however I look. It's just whatever identifiers, what flags are in the back end go, oh, you made a red guard, so this, dialogue will pop up. It's still not, oh, look, you are brown and you are from this hemisphere and people like you, quote unquote, do such things. The only other attempt I've seen at it was with Dragon Age Inquisition. And, that's still more about whether you're a dwarf, a human, a Canary, or a human mage. And there's still not that interaction. And it's only that one time, so it feels very out of place.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, if you think about a lot of character creators, like with that example there you were talking about there, where things like you are a lizard person is acknowledged in game. Usually those will crop up, and when you're selecting them in the character creator, it will say, this is the background of this lizard person species you've picked. This is what contextually that visual choice you have made means within the world. And as such, these are some of the potential consequences of picking the lizard person class. You never get that for race. You never get like, hey, this is what the cultural attitudes to race are, and as such, what the consequences might be for the race you have in the character creator. There is a distinction between you have chosen to be a lizard person, which is a narrative character choice, versus you have chosen your race that is purely an aesthetic choice.
Exactly. And, there's so many ways that this manifests, but, a lot of it comes down to who is making the games. For those listening, if you're a part of the IGDA, or International Game Developers Association, they actually put out an annual survey about diversity, and they also talk to developers and kind of gauge who's in the industry, kind of, what is it that they're doing, satisfaction. And one statistic that always, stands out is the very long bar of white people who are the ones making games. So if you still have a majority white population making games, these are not going to be things that occur to them. And a lot of people don't realize or understand that diversity consulting is a thing, or there's a consequence to, I'm going to make this black character, or I'm going to make this brown character and put all these markers on them, and then be angry and upset when people go, hold on, you did X. You realize this comes off as racist or what have you.
Yeah, like, so often the answer, like, when people say, oh, why even bother trying to be diverse in games because people will just complain that you didn't do it well enough, the answer is usually, ask people of affected minority groups to help, and they'll usually get you around the pitfalls that occur. Like, I ended up writing something about trans stuff in games, about Krem in Dragon Age Inquisition, and about the fact that, like, the reason that Krem as a trans man is so rarely criticized is because the people making that game took a lot of advice from consultants and changed things to avoid pitfalls. It's like, it's not that hard to ask a person of color, hey, get multiple people of color in and be like, what is your perspective on what we have done? Like, are we walking into any potential pitfalls? It's not that hard to do.
It's not that hard, but there's a lot of pushback because, obviously people want to protect their intellectual property. There's worried about NDA. But, I'll choose Watch Dogs. I hated the first Watch Dogs. Took it back literally the next day after I played it. Worst protagonist I've seen in a game in a long time. And then years later we get Watch Dogs 2. And you know why it was such a better game? Because they got consultants. Because Ubisoft Montreal is a very white studio because it's up in Montreal. But they learned from what people said about the first game. And that is proof of concept that, hey, maybe if you actually get diversity consultants and pay them and listen to them, you can do better.
You're only saying that because you want to get paid for being black. That's,
Sure.
Oh, so often that's the thing that happens whenever you bring up, like, consultants in any regard to diversity. People are just like, you're just trying to monetize your identity. It's like,
okay.
It's like,
sure.
I'm trying to monetize work, and I'm pointing out that, like, getting people who are personally affected by things to help tell their stories generally leads to better pieces of media, and that is work, and work should be paid for. I don't think that's an unfair thing to say.
Oh, it's totally not. But I mean, we've both seen it where people think, "Oh, you're on Twitter and you talk a lot, and you push your Patreon because you think people should pay you for tweeting." I'm like, no, I talk a lot, and people go, "I learn from you, and I want to learn more from you." So I'm like, "That's great. I've got bills to pay. Please pay me." It's just it's such a weird response of, well, you're complaining about this thing, and how dare you say that you want to make it better, but then you dare want filthy money. And I'm like, yes, because my landlord will not take exposure. My landlord will not go, you know what, I'm just waiting on a check, or I help the community out. That's good enough, right? People forget that we live in a capitalist society, or it only applies to certain people to do free emotional and literal labor to make things better. Look at also Mafia 3. They have black staff members who wrote the game. They did consultants. They did their work. So that is another place where it's like, you can do the work if you really want to tell a good story, just like any other thing you do.
And it's one of those, if you put the work in, you get a good response from the community, usually being like, yes, we can see in the end result that you put the effort into doing this right. So it usually shows pretty clearly in the end result.
Yep, but a lot of people don't think about that. All they go is, this doesn't center me. The world has told me I'm the most important one, and that I'm always the hero. And when they're not the hero, ooh, look at how they act. I mean, look at the reaction of Far Cry 5. It's not even out yet.
One of my favorite examples of this was a few years back. I tweeted an image of like the original Mass Effect game's character creator menu, and all I did was I like switched the position of like custom male and default male, which were at the top, and custom female, default female that were below, and I swapped the position around. I was like, is this so hard? And people were like, why are you forcing people to play as a female version of this character? That's not the default. I'm like, I literally just put them in different positions in a menu and like messed around with a default, and people are like, oh, you're getting rid of men from video games, because there's so much pushback from this idea of just like, don't default to white male character as the default option. There are very few games that I see that that do that. There is one example I can ever think of where there was a character creator where the default human character was not white male. And it's still not perfect, but it was the first season of the Minecraft story mode, which defaulted to female character at the top and male character below, but it did still default to white on the left and different races you've got to move to. But, like, it's so weird that we are that ingrained that, like, user interfaces even lock into this idea of straight white male is default character. We can't make them even have to move off the default option. Like, it's not enough to just have a white male character option. They have to be able to get to it without moving the analog stick.
Yeah, I mean, look at Rust. That's a great example where it totally randomizes everything.
Oh god, and so many people got pissed off about that. They're like, oh, I don't want to play as this type of character. It, like, got pissed off that, like, they were randomly assigned a character that wasn't straight white man.
Well, and this is what always bothers me about that response of, I don't want to have to be a black dude. I don't want to have to be a woman. At the end of the day, or whenever you turn off your console or end the game on your computer, you have lost literally nothing for the few hours you spend as Marcus or Lincoln, or if you play Virginia, if you play a female Shep or Hawk or whatever. There is no penalty to you for the few hours you're going to spend in that game as this character. However, for me and people like me, I don't get that privilege. I'm black every day, all day, till I die. And me, I've never jumped up and said, oh, it's reverse racism because I have to go be a white dude every time I play something. I've just spoken up of, I'm tired of this default. And I don't get the privilege. I get to go pretend to be a white dude in a game. It affords me no privilege in the real world. It gets me nothing. And when I finally get to see myself in these games, like Remember Me with Nilin or Virginia, although I felt a way about Virginia, these are such tiny, minuscule moments for me as a player to have that moment, I'm going to hoard them. It may not be great representation, it may not be perfect representation, but it's so few and far between. That's why so many people are so clingy, and I know it's not the best word, but it's why so many people cling to any little bit of hope or appearance, or, you know, the vitriolic response I got to my Twintel piece of I wasn't excited about her because to me she represented some things I didn't like. But people were like, but we finally get a black character. Why aren't you happy? And it's like, because we should not be taking crumbs and being excited for it.
It's this idea you get with anything regarding diversity, that the idea that if you're critical of something in media, then you would have rather not had it. And it's like, no, if you love media, you should be critical of it because you should want it to be better than it is. You should, you know, take something like that and be like, yes, I'm glad we have this, but I'm not happy about these aspects. Be critical of the things you love. Be critical of the things important to you. Criticism doesn't mean that you don't like a medium.
Well, yeah, and that's how we get back to the stupid and never-ending our game's art, but it's like, no, because nobody can criticize a game and not get a death threat these days.
Yeah. You need to be able to criticize art, and that's still not a thing that people are happy with video games. But, yeah, the only other thing I think was, we had discussed before we started the call that I think is worth touching on is this whole idea that while we definitely need things to improving character creators, because, like, you can't accurately represent a lot of people of colour in character creators, even if you can change race, even if that was fixed, it doesn't fix the underlying issue of character creators really aren't a stand-in for, like, actually designing people of colour characters that aren't... Because, like, character creators are ultimately just blank shell characters. Mm-hmm. And unless your aesthetic choices are being made into narrative choices in some regard, it's not a stand-in for actually developing characters of colour.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to, you can tell narratives, you can tell stories featuring characters of color and have it not be a big deal. But a lot of it is, I think people are stuck on, if I put a character of color in there, it has to focus on their race or racism, or if they're queer, it has to be about homophobia, transphobia. But surprise, these are not the only facets of people's lives that they focus on. And I think that's where it becomes a circular trap, because people think, well, how can I put this character in here and not address this? But then it becomes the focus of that character, and that's when you still wind up with a tropey mess. You know, like, that's why I love so much about Mafia 3, because racism was there, it was part of the story, because you can't tell a story about 1968 Louisiana and not address race, but it was not the be-all, end-all of Lincoln's arc, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's... Again, my examples tend to lean more towards, like, trans depictions just because it's the wheelhouse I know, but, like, it's what I always say about Kremen Dragon Age. It's this idea of, yeah, like, they brought up the fact they were trans in a jokey context. It was not what their plot revolved around. And you, as a player, could choose to say some shitty transphobic stuff, and other characters would step up and be like, no, that's shitty and transphobic, fuck off, don't do that. But, like, it wasn't what defined their character. It was something that came up naturally in conversation. You could follow up about it, and there would be natural responses, but then their story continued, and they continued to be, you know, to have their own stories that weren't about that aspect of themselves.
Yeah, and you know, as a big Dragon Age fan, and as someone who cares about representation, I must say it made me incredibly uncomfortable, that conversation, because I was like, I would never actually ask a trans person these questions. And I'm like, why is this here?
The impression I get, and a lot of this comes from, like, I published an article on this a while back, that heavily was, involved transcripts of emails from consultants with the lead writer. And one of the things that's really interesting that comes up is the lead writer very clearly wanted that content in there to be like, if the player is shitty and, like, bigoted, let's give them their chance to ask those questions they want to ask, and then use our characters to shut them down and be like, no, you're being an idiot. and to give them the option to say the things they're thinking and to be shut down and be told, nope, that was a thing you shouldn't be... No, don't go down that route. And I like that idea of taking characters that players hopefully by this point already respect and want to listen to the opinions of, and getting them to be the ones to say, no, shut down those stupid ideas you have. This is why they're stupid.
Okay, that's legit, but it was just like, oh my god, I feel so uncomfortable right now. And
Yeah.
it wasn't because, I'm transphobic. It was like, oh my god, why would anyone say this to someone? So, I don't know.
Depressingly, a lot of people do.
Yeah, I realize that now. I guess I was being entirely naive, because I was just like, what's wrong with people? Like, why? So that was my own kind of learning moment, I guess. Even though I wasn't a player that's what the goal would have been with me, it was just like, I felt like deeply bad for anyone who's ever had those questions,
Yeah, it is a weird thing, but yeah, I feel like we're probably reaching like a sort of wrap-uppy point. Have you got any other thoughts you want to share before we finish up?
Just if you're listening to this and you make games, remember that marginalized folks of any identity and intersections of identity are not monoliths. If you are going to have a well-rounded game world, you cannot have just that one character of color, that one trans character, that one female character, because then they bear the burden of representing everyone. And also, believe in diversity consultants. Pay them. If you work at a big AAA studio and you have that kind of power, people will take your money and help you not screw up. So think about the product you put in the world. It does not exist in a vacuum. And listen when your players go, hey, you messed up.
Yep, that is a good way to wrap that up, I think. So if people have enjoyed listening to this and they want to find more of the things you do, what things do you do on the internet, and where are those things found?
I talk a lot. Unfortunately, I just ended my podcast, but there's 95 episodes to go back through. So if you go to freshoutoftokens.simplecast.fm, you can go back through the archive. You can find me on Twitter at CypherOfTyr, CypherOfTyr. And I also run a nonprofit, I Need Diverse Games. So that's ineeddiversegames.org. And if you are listening and want a diversity consult, you can reach me at Tanya at ineeddiversegames.org.
You should totally do that. Tanya's very good at the things that she does. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll do more content at some point in the future, probably, because Tanya's super cool, and I'm sure we'll find another reason to talk in the future. So thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.